Hello, everyone. So we're starting again, week 5 in Ecclesiastes, and we're reading through the book of Ecclesiastes, but we're naming this series "Why Am I Here?" And the whole purpose of this series has been in line with our theme for the whole year. What does it look like to follow Jesus in a non-Jesus following world? And we've been looking at books of the Bible that talk a whole lot about characters and people in churches who have been living out the mission of God, the mission of the church in hostile environments. But what's interesting about Ecclesiastes is it's actually very different than that. It's actually very different than how the majority of the Bible operates. Because it asks a lot of questions, and it's mainly mental. And it's asking questions about life. It's asking important human questions that most of us, if not all of us, ask at one point or another as we walk and journey through life. But it also seems to ask questions of the Bible itself. And at other times, it even seems like it's asking questions of God. And I think this is so helpful for us trying to navigate what it looks like to live as a Jesus follower when the rest of the world around us doesn't, for a whole lot of reasons. And one is for our own personal growth and development. It teaches us that questions like these are not out of line, but that they are important and they're worth asking. But the truth is, if we go about asking them in the wrong way, in ways that aren't healthy or helpful, instead of getting to answers that are helpful and that help us grow, we get answers that could just breed cynicism and anger and disappointment, make us think that there's no hope in this world. But what the Bible shows us is that we can ask these questions. And if we ask them the right way and explore them the right way, not only will we find answers, but we'll find the right answers. And we'll grow, we'll find hope, we'll see God better, we'll know Him better, and we'll be able to live out the mission of God and the mission of the church and worship God better, which is good. But also, on the other hand, it's not just for us. The truth is, if we're going to be Jesus followers in a world where people aren't following Jesus, as we've been talking about this whole year, it is essential for the church, for us, the people of God, to spread the gospel to our neighbor, to bring hope to a world that doesn't have it. And what's helpful about the questions that we find in Ecclesiastes is that these aren't just Bible questions, these are deeply human questions. And our neighbors, they're asking these questions. And many times the reason our neighbor doesn't know Jesus or isn't interested in Jesus is because they've answered these questions in a way that isn't actually helpful. Or they found answers that aren't actually the true answer, or they've just simply never been able to answer them at all. And as we walk through this together, it not only helps us grow as Christians, but it helps us better minister to our neighbor around us. And so that's why we're doing this. That's why we're going through this odd book that asks some questions that might not make sense, as it wonders whether or not life even makes sense. So Let's keep reading. We're going to be in chapter 2, and we're going to ask this week's question. So this is starting in verse 17. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. That's not a word we use, grievous. I don't know that I've ever used that word ever in my life. But the Hebrew word here that's being translated into grievous here is the word ra. And this word typically, when we find it in Hebrew, is the word evil. So what he's saying is, as I think about the work that we do here in this life, he hates it because it seems to be evil. All of it is meaningless. And this word meaningless, we've been talking about this. It's actually this word hevel, which is more accurately translated as smoke or vapor. And the reason he's using this word and it gets translated as meaningless because it has to do with this sense of it doesn't make sense, right? The work that we do in this world seems evil because it seems like it just doesn't make sense. No matter how hard we try, we can't grasp it. We can't understand it. It's a chasing after the wind. It actually doesn't produce anything. It's not effective. The work we do just seems pointless. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish, yet they will have control over all the fruit of my work in which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too doesn't make sense. So we're talking about work this week. And so I think we're going to find that this text is actually incredibly relevant for today. But before we talk about how it's relevant for today, we have to remember that this was actually written thousands of years ago. And so we have to remember what's going on, because he didn't write this in a vacuum, right? We're in chapter 2. We've been reading chapter 2. And so we have to remember everything that we talked about last week is still what's on his mind as we talk about what's going on this week. And so last week, we saw our author. What he said is, I'm going to put myself in the place of a king. And he did this on purpose, because kings are the most powerful people in the world. And he asked the question, what can the king's successor do that those before him couldn't do? Which is ultimately this question of, he's asking, what can I do to make a difference in the world, to make a change that hasn't happened before me? And he's saying, you know what? If I'm going to consider how I use my life to make a difference, he's saying, then I'm going to think, if I'm a king, if I'm the most powerful person in the world, what can I get done? Right? Because kings are the ones who get things done. But he says, not just any kind of king. I'm going to consider, what if I am a certain kind of king? He says there's different types of people. There's different kinds of kings. I can be wise, or I can be ruled by folly or by madness. And last week, if you were here, we talked about this. This word wisdom in the Old Testament, it means more than how I think we mean it today. I think when we talk about wisdom in here, a lot of us are thinking about, well, it's something just in my mind, right? How smart am I? How educated am I? How good am I at being experienced with knowledge and applying it to my life, maybe? And that last part's a little bit closer. We saw that it's mostly used in the Old Testament to talk about skill, right? If I'm a skilled king, if I'm a talented king, am I able to make a difference? And as we follow his thought, what he realizes is that no matter what he does in this world, someday he is going to die and he's going to be forgotten. And all the work that he had done, everything he had done to make a difference and to change the world, is going to be for nothing, because he's going to die and he's going to be forgotten and it'll all be lost. And here he digs even deeper into this, realizing is not only is he going to die and lose his position of control, but someone is going to take possession of control, right? When he talks about having to leave his work to someone later, right? If we're thinking from the place of a king, he's talking about his heir. He's talking about the person who will have control after him. And the truth is, if he's dead and he's forgotten, then no matter what he's built, this person after him is actually going to be in control of his legacy and what he's done. And because he hasn't worked for it, because he doesn't know where he came from, this person is going to run the kingdom into the ground. And so we get this thing here. I hated life because I worked so hard. I was skilled. I was a good king. I was powerful. I had resources. And I was wise. But no matter what difference I made, it's all for naught. Because someone's going to take what I've built when I'm done, and they won't care about the things that I cared about. They won't have had to have worked the way I had to work. They will not have seen the changes that I saw. They will not have had to have overcome what I overcame. And as they forget the past, they will destroy what I built. And it asks this question of, can I actually make a difference? And this is a question that I think we ask as we spend so much of our life in work or in hobbies or in some capacity, maybe even in this church, volunteering, trying to make a difference. And when we really ask these deep questions of what's going to happen after I die, we can come to realize that the work that we did now won't matter tomorrow because we won't be here to always be in control and to preserve what we've been doing. Someday, death will catch up to us. Someone will take control after us, and they will undo what we did. And that's hard to think about because it makes it feel like our life and all the work that we've done is a waste. And the Bible is saying, yeah, that makes sense. That's why the author here, he thinks about this and he says, so I hated life, and working seemed evil. Because at the end of the day, all of his hard work was to make a difference, was to make a change, to make sure his life was important and significant. And he realizes that because of sin and death, there's actually nothing he can do to make a difference. And so then he asks the question, so is my life even important? Is there anything about my life that is even significant? And I think these are questions that are important to us even today as we realize that though thousands of years have passed, this reality is still the same. So let's keep going. We're in verse 20 now. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may work with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not worked for it. This too doesn't make sense, and it's a great misfortune. What do people get for all the work and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This too doesn't make sense. I think we get this one. What he's asking here is, what is the point for all the stress that I carry in this life? And I think we get this. I think we ask this question, why is life so stressful? I think we do this for a lot of reasons, right? Sometimes we do this because it really is just a matter like when we work hard, we can start making a lot more money, right? But the truth is that he's bringing up is no matter how much money we make, no matter how much we buy, just like he was thinking, like, if I make a difference as a king, I'm going to have to give that away and it's going to all be undone. But even if I don't even care about making a difference, even if I just think about, like, man, I made some cash as king. I had some pretty cool things as king. He realizes even that stuff is going to have to be given away. And the truth is, it's all going to be thrown away. And that's still true for us today, right? Everything we own, all of it. So think about it. Take a moment. Think of everything you own. Your most prized possessions, even just the most mundane necessities that you have, and even the stuff that you're thinking like, yeah, when I get home, I should probably throw that away. All of that stuff. Someday, it will go to someone else because you're going to die and you can't take it with you. And when that happens, the truth is, your family or your friends, they're probably going to roll up to your house with a big dumpster and throw it all away. And it asks the question, why did I work so hard and live under so much stress that I had trouble sleeping at night? Because that's an outdated problem, right? No. And we ask the question, what is the point? But I think sometimes it's easy for us to recognize, like, yeah, we as Americans can be really materialistic. And when we're honest, we recognize that that's not what life is all about, right? But what is life all about? You still see people who can admit that, even Christians, but they still live this life where they put so much pressure on themselves to work and to work hard and to carry so much stress that they can't sleep at night. And I think it's not always just for money, it's not always just for stuff, but because it's this idea that our teacher's been talking about. If we work hard enough, we can be more important, right? I can be that good boss. I can be that good employee. I can start a business. I can start a nonprofit. I can get involved with the church or with some organization or someone somewhere. And because of my hard work, the world can be different. My life can mean something because I made a change. But what he's pointing out is, no matter how hard we work, no matter how much stress we endured, everything that we accomplish will be given away and thrown away someday. And it just won't matter. So what do? Why does life carry so much stress? And what do we do about it? And for once, our teacher gives us an answer. This is what he says. It's verse 24. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own work. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too doesn't make sense, and it's a chasing after the wind. It just doesn't amount to anything. And this answer is interesting. It's actually caused a lot of controversy in the church as we've read this, because if you were here last week, we talked a little bit about Paul addressing how non-Christians have to think. And it sounds a lot like this. What Paul says is, if we don't actually have assurance that Jesus rose from the grave, if that didn't actually happen, then Christians are the most to be pitied. Why? Because there is no hope. If Jesus did not walk healed out of his grave, fully alive after having been murdered, then the author of Ecclesiastes is right. Then everything we do, every relationship we have, all of it is for nothing, because we're going to die and be forgotten, and it's as if it never happened. But if Jesus walked out of his grave, if Jesus truly does have the power to save and to heal and to rescue all things, even those who have died, then we have hope. But for those who don't, their only response that makes sense is to say, eat and drink today because tomorrow we die. In other words, if we're going to die and just be forgotten, why live such a stressful life? Instead, our value should be to get as much good food and as much good drink as we can possibly get and just fill our life with as much pleasure and joy as we can. Because once it's done, it's over. And once we can't get it anymore, we're never going to get it again. So just enjoy today because we have no hope for tomorrow. And this passage, this answer that the teacher gives has caused controversy because it kind of sounds like the Bible is saying what Paul said the non-Christians say. Eat and drink today because tomorrow we die. But we'll notice, this man, he didn't know Jesus. But he did know that God was real and that he was on a mission to restore the world. And so let's read between the lines and go deeper into this passage to see that it is actually very different than the non-Christians Paul was talking about. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own work. Because tomorrow we die? No. Because this too, I see, is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? In other words, the teacher is looking at life and he's saying, man, when I put all of my effort into being important, into making a difference, into being someone of significance, when I say I'm going to solve all the problems of the world and it fills my life with stress and work and I can't even sleep at night, that doesn't seem worth it. But when I sit down after a hard day's meal and enjoy the food and the drink I have, I can enjoy it and I can be happy. Why? Because that's all there is? No, but because he knows that when he gets the gifts of a good meal and something good to drink after a hard day's work, that itself is a gift from God. He finds contentment not in what he has in his hand, but from the fact that God has put something in his hand. His joy, his feeling of contentment doesn't come from whether or not he is significant. Instead, it comes from recognizing that he is loved by God. And I think on this side of the cross, we can appreciate that as well. And we can see that Paul actually shares this sentiment. He's not going against what the New Testament says. He gets what the New Testament gets. And we can see this in 1 Corinthians 4, starting in verse 9. So this is Paul talking to a church. And he's writing this letter, if we put it in context a little bit, and he's just been commending them, that they're a good church who loves the family of God around them. And they're good at loving and supporting and caring for fellow believers. And so he says, about your love for one another, we do not need to write to you. For you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. And in fact, you do love all of God's family throughout Macedonia. Yet, we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more, and to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anybody. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time to dig into this as deeply as I'd like to, because there's a lot of stuff going on here, and we got to understand the book of Thessalonians a little bit better to understand fully what's going on here. But I can assure you, just trust me, he's not saying in order for us to be good Christians and to respond to the questions from Ecclesiastes well, that we all need to live like the Amish. It's not what he's saying. But notice what he is saying is that if we're going to love people and to continue on as the church, as we're called to be, then we need to make it our ambition to lead a quiet life. I don't know about you, but the way I've been taught is that those two things are actually in contradiction with each other. To lead a quiet life is actually the opposite of ambition. But what's interesting about what the Bible has to say about the good life is the opposite. That our ambition as people who follow Jesus is not to make ourselves important. It's not to make our life significant. It's not to change the world. It's not even to fix the problem of sin. Instead, we're to lead a quiet life. Why? Because I think when we chase after being important and significant, when it's our life goal that we take on so much stress that we can't even sleep at night just to make ourselves important, to make a difference. Maybe it's for good intentions. There is sin in this world, and I am working hard to do something about it. Don't get me wrong. That's a worthy goal. Christians are called to fight against sin, but the difference is understanding that we are not God. And when our highest value, that it drives our ambition and the way we live our life, is to make ourselves important, and even to fix the sin problem itself, ultimately what we're doing is we are deciding that it is our life goal to be God. And if we do that, we're going to realize that we will always fail. Because we are not God. We cannot be God, and we should not be God. And as Christians, we recognize that that's the case because Jesus walked out of his grave healed. Because he is the author of life, because he is God. Only God has the power to fix sin. Do we have the power to resist sin? Absolutely. Are we called to bring light to darkness? Absolutely. But there's a line. There's a difference between spreading the gospel and thinking that we can do what only God can do. We can fight against sin, but only God will truly restore and fix our world. And if we are going to live the good life that God's called us to, we cannot keep living as if we are God, or living striving to be God. Instead, what God says is, I love you. We need to understand that, yes, someday we're going to die and we're going to be forgotten. But God knows our name. And how do we know that? Because after a hard day's work, we can come home and have a good meal and something to drink, and then sleep peacefully in a warm bed. Why? Because we worked so hard for it? Because we're so special? No, because God knows our name. This world and the people in it will forget us if they know us at all. But God himself knows our name. And that is where our purpose, that's where our happiness, our joy should come from. And I just want to have a quick thought experiment here with you. So I'm going to read out of verse 24 in Ecclesiastes again. And just think about this. Imagine this. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own work. So I just want you to think for a moment of life after a hard day's work, sitting at the table and enjoying what you have to eat and enjoying what you have to drink and what God's given you. And as you imagine this, do you imagine yourself there alone? Or are there others at that table with you? We are to be people of love. We are people who resist sin and spread the gospel by following God, by living with the most powerful weapon he gave us, and that's love. And when we live a life full of stress, because our ultimate goal is to make ourselves important, to make our lives meaningful and significant, because we just want to matter, we end up losing sight of the very thing that we actually have power to do. And that is to love people. We can't change the world, but we can change the life of our friends and our family and our neighbor by showing them the love of God that God himself has given to us. But we can only do that when we recognize that we are not God, that we can't be God, but that we need God. And he loves us, and he knows us, and he died for us, and he proved that he can heal the sin problem, because he walked out of his grave fully restored. And he promises us that that's what we have to look forward to. And so, let's not live life full of stress because we want to be God, but instead let's live life worth enjoying, knowing that God loves us and that God, Jesus Christ himself, will save us and fix the sin problem. Will you pray with me?